what does this look like today as we try to pioneer movements? You know, this is our context as far as our churches, our seminaries. We're training people here, and then we're living in a context in society that's here. And if we're sending them on the mission field, it's here. So, you see the disconnect? How in the world is somebody going to be able to enter into this area here and begin to see any fruit when they're being trained in this setting? We had a guy show up to a training like this from Haiti, part of Carter and Dave Miller's network out of Oklahoma City. And he's a missionary down in Haiti. And he went down to Haiti to start seminaries. That's what he went to do. For 11 months, that's what he went down there. He learned this. He went down into this kind of setting, and he was trying to build these there. And for 11 months, he banged his head against the wall, and he was like, man, half these people can't read. He didn't know what to do. He was ready to quit and move home. And then Dave reached out to him. I think he used to be his youth pastor. He connected him. We got to do a little online training with him and cast some vision. And then that church starting in Oklahoma City paid his way to come to a 4-day training. And so he came to what you guys went through this week. He processed for a month. He goes back to Haiti. And his big shift was, I've been doing it. I need to see the Haitians do it. So priesthood of believer, he began to release and equip them in these simple reproducing, how do you make disciples, with the authority to start churches. And from March to September, their first report, they saw over 1,500 people come to Christ in the harvest. They saw 150 churches started, and 12 of them were to the 4th generation in Haiti. And the gospels began to sweep up the mountains to different cities, witch doctors repenting and believing. It's a move of God. Jacob comes back to the States for a month, and while he's gone, 50 more churches get started. He's got more 4th generation. He's got some 5th generation churches that God is starting through the Haitian leaders. And so he had to abandon this, not abandon this context, but he had to, as far as he was equipped here, then he learned, okay, how do I go into here? And now there's God, and God's moving. I mean, it's not because of the tools but he was set up for failure going in with this kind of a strategy. So then the question is, how do we equip people in this setting to engage here locally, and how do we mobilize our missionaries? Because we've got missionaries that are trained here and are mobilized into this. And you're not going to be able to go through Grudem with those people. You're just not. They don't care about arguing it. We need to get back to the simple tools. So we wanted to share just briefly. Here's what we're seeing God doing in the U.S. context. So we hope it'll encourage you as far as working with existing churches and that the bride of Christ would become the training and mobilization centers for local and global missions and church planting. And then after lunch, we're going to hear a little bit from Mighty Mike about what God's doing. So, first off, Ephesians 4, what we said the other day, apes and PTs. Now, we disagree with ourselves when we say this, but it just helps us understand. Kingdom of God, breadth. These are your pioneers. Okay? They're thinking new people, new places. Where's the lostness at? Your shepherd teachers are thinking depth. Okay? Health. If we want to see the kingdom expand, it needs to get healthy. Who's more valuable in the kingdom of God? Yes. Both. Okay? Both equally valuable. The problem is, because we're here, there's not much room for these guys in a local church setting. The apes, the pioneers, they don't have a place. They will typically drive their pastors nuts. Okay? Why are we reaching lost people? Why are we doing this? And so we'll find them in a lot of parachurch ministries that are heavy on evangelism and discipleship, but that don't have the authority to start churches. or you find them overseas. Okay? So because most of the leadership is here, most of our church planting strategies are shepherd driven. Most of our missions equipping is shepherd driven. We've forgotten the ape. Okay? And the truth is that if we, as Ray said earlier, man, if we want to see movement, it happens in that third field. It's through discipleship. It's the apes and the shepherd teachers working together, because these guys can often be terrible disciplers. Okay, they want to move on. Well, if this is going to be really healthy, we need some shepherding involved, right? These guys, don't expect them to go out and share with 1,000 people. It's not going to happen. Now, they should still make disciples, but don't put the burden of an ape on a shepherd teacher. I used to go into churches guns blazing with the Great Commission. How many disciples you got? How many people you share the gospel with this week? You know? And it's like, what? All right? So, does that make sense? To quote Ray Vaughn, does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah.
So now, I learned this from my buddy Ron Surgeon in Memphis. With this understanding, every church has apes inside of it, okay? And in most cases, the leadership is shepherd teacher. Now, these people are either marginalized, or in a lot of cases, they don't know they're apostolic. They don't know they're pioneers. Just like you don't know if somebody's a teacher until they teach. And when they teach, it's pretty rough. I don't know about you guys, but when I was first teaching, it was rough. I had to be a discipled. It's the same thing here. These apes don't know they're apes. What they respond to is vision and the harvest. Okay, big vision and the harvest. That's ape magnets. All right, that's ape bait.
Ape bait. I like it.
Yep.
Ape bait.
So, now I'll tell you a scenario. We did that same training Jacob went to from Haiti last year in Florida, and we had one of the HR people from E3 Partners come with her husband. And she's like, man, you guys are bringing so many people on board. I want to see what y'all are doing. So they came to the training, and they said, we had every intention of skipping the harvest time. And but we structured it in a way they couldn't. So they're out in the harvest, and, you know, they're timid, and she and Evan, and they're out, and they see the gospel modeled by a guy named Tony up in Canada. They see it a couple times, and it's as if like a switch was flipped in him, in Evan. He's like, all right, I got this. He knew what to do. He was trained, but he hadn't actually gone out in the harvest. He goes out in the harvest. He sees it modeled. Boom. He starts sharing. It's like he is now like activated, man. He went from 0 to 100 right there. And he will not stop sharing. He's stopping. I got it on my phone. He stopped a guy on his bicycle to share the gospel with him. They go back to Texas, and Catherine, like several months later, she's like, man, you've wrecked him. He will not stop sharing the gospel with people. Like, we go out on a date, and he won't stop sharing. I got to add an hour to our night. So this messed him up. But what we found is there's an evangelist who didn't know he's an evangelist. Now imagine that evangelist going home to his small group or missional community. What's he going to do there? Guys. Come on, guys. We got to go to the harvest. Man, I got to set me and my pastor. Dude, you're in sin. We need to go. We need to get out of the harvest. Right? Carter, you experienced that. Right? They don't know any better. So, I feel like our role as catalysts when we're working with churches is, one, we got to honor the bride. But what we want to do is we want to create a catalytic ministry of the church. All right? You got small groups? Great. You got Sunday school? Great. You got Awanas? Great. Can we start a movement ministry in this church? And the way we do that is we filter and we find who the apes are, and then we gather them together into a team. And we disciple them to get to movement, as you all heard, in the harvest. Okay? And we give them room to freely see God's kingdom multiply. out in the harvest. Then you got a team. Now what happens here can be celebrated from the pulpit, just like what we saw with those of you who were at the No Place Left banquet here at Sugar Creek and all that's going on, celebrating this Casting Vision. All right, it can be celebrated from the church, and then these folks are able to go back in and pull others out with them to keep seeing the kingdom multiply. Whereas what we're seeing in other cities, they're going and helping other churches get this locally. All right? So then the million-dollar question is, how do we go from here to here? And what we've discovered is training. And what our team has been doing is combining the mall principle and combining the fact that in the U.S. it takes about 3 touches of any kind of training before people really get it. That means 3 of these guys. Okay? 3 touch trainings. And we'll go in, and the outcome will be, not that everybody gets it, not that everybody in the church is sold out for no place left, but we've got the team that can lead the ministry of the church that's going to catalyze movement there locally. That's the goal. And I'll let you know, again, there's other ways to do this. This is not the only way, but this is how we've been rolling it out. Yeah.
How does the church not feel like they're asking their members to leave and start home churches? Or how does the church get on board with that? And that seems to be the ultimate goal here. Yeah, I don't know how you...
He'll get there in a minute.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. So, 3 touches of training includes an event where we cover fields 1, 2, 3, and 4 in about an 8-hour setting. And it includes time in the harvest. All right, so we got vision, we equip them in lesson 1, 411, give them the person of peace. We go out in the harvest, we come back, we model the first command with the church circle, and then we push them to a weekly training. Okay? And this event helps us find people. The weekly is what gets to movement. Okay? But we're following the mall principle. The first training, we're going in and we're modeling. So we're training 100% and they're watching us. Okay, so we'll swarm in. We'll bring 4 to 8 to 10 people in from the outside, from different cities, and they'll see us model a training. And then they lead a weekly rollout of the commands. And oftentimes they're going out in the harvest. Okay, then we go back 2 to 3 months later. We come in with an event. It's the exact same thing as this one. Except what's different here? Yeah, now we're coming in as an assist, and I'd say 50% or more are the local trainers. And we're not using the people that are really good public speakers. We're using the people that actually did it the previous 2 to 3 months. Only training with doers. And the way we filter that is part of the training is they have to get up and share a story from the harvest. So if you're a trainer and you don't have a story from the harvest, you ain't training. All right? Then they follow it up with a weekly rollout. 2, 3, and by this time, not only are they doing 3/3 group, they're also in the harvest. Okay, so a weekly time, they've got a 3/3 training people can jump in on. A weekly time, they're going out in the harvest. It's part of their programming. And then lastly, we'll come back 2 to 3 months later. We'll do an event training. This time, we're watching them. And they're doing 100%, and we're doing 0. Okay? And then after about 3 to 6 months, we'll come back and we'll do a mid-level training. Or we'll start to give some Field 5 tools. Plug that in there. And then what you've got at the end of this is a team. You've got a catalytic team. And the goal is this catalytic team will weekly meet for 3/3 and will weekly, at a minimum, meet to go out in the harvest. That becomes the ministry of the church. And what we're really seeing is as we go into new cities, by the second touch, we got multiple churches involved. Like Tulsa, the second time, we had 5 locations. Daniel came in and led at one church. Mateo came in and led at another church. Allows us to pull in a bunch of trainers from the outside. Tom just led a second touch in Pittsburgh last week, and there were 6 locations. So we're pulling new trainees from Toronto, new trainees from South Florida, from Tulsa, all to swarm train together, cross-pollinate to help pioneer and get these teams going. Yeah.
So the first event you're training goes 1 through 4.
Uh-huh.
And the weekly, are you just kind of going over that and reinforcing that? So then the second event you're training.
Exact same thing.
You're training the same thing.
This are identical.
So Troy, help me understand the difference between the event and the weekly. What are we doing each one time a week when we get together versus what happens at the event?
Yeah, the weekly training is 3/3 where they're going through lesson 1 and then boom, they start going through the commands. And what I've noticed in cities that are getting there faster is they're also adding a time in the harvest. I would say after the first touch, realistically, hey man, one or the other. You can do both, great. But usually they can't add 2 weekly things to their calendar. So pick one. But after the second touch, there's enough commitment here that, again, this is a filter. After the second touch, they're usually got one of both happening. 3/3 really pulls out these guys. The harvest time really pulls out these guys. So you got them together.
But at the first touch event, there is an evangelism, like there is a harvest time.
Oh, yeah.
That they're taking out.
Yeah, we go out every training has to include going out in the harvest. Give them what they need, get them out in the harvest. Okay? Because then that's finding these people. All right, then this team is able to lead trainings in the area. They're able to help us swarm in other areas. They've got the confidence and the competence. And so we used to say, let's look for the general. I mean, still look for the general, but I say, man, look for the team. Because the team is what'll last. So yeah, and that's not the only way to roll it out. I'm just saying we've done this in Florida. We've seen it in San Francisco, Toronto, Tulsa, Grenada, Indianapolis. We're rolling out in Chicago. There's other cities I'm forgetting, but you know, this time 12 months ago, there were not teams in those cities. San Francisco's got 5 teams. We just did a third touch there. Tulsa has I don't know how many different teams. Okay. So let me bring it back to here, because then the question is, all right, well, how do you find these churches? Because it's like, do we just knock on the church's door and say, hey, let us come train you? And I would equate it to just like we're looking for people of peace. I don't have a Bible verse for this, but I feel like we're looking for churches of peace, pastors of peace. And here's what we pray and we fast for. There's 3 things. Number 1, that they are broken for lostness. And when I say they, I mean the leadership. Number 2 is that they have a God-sized vision. And number 3, they want training. We want to approach them humbly. You guys want training? If you've already got something, great. I'm not going to try to impose our will on you.
How much does it cost, Troy?
Well, Carter, we don't charge anything, but it will cost them their life. Okay? So when we're praying and fasting for these types of churches, we have never actually had an appointment with a church to try to get them to do this. They have always come to us. That's not they come to us. I'm just telling you, that's the truth.
Praise God.
All right? We had one church where Tom actually knocked on the pastor's door
In the harvest.
in the harvest. And the pastor's like, I want this. Come train our church. All right? So we're finding them. They're finding us one way or the other. All right? And at this point, I would say, by the grace of God, and it might change in a few years, but No Place Left has a good name among churches right now. I mean, for the majority. No Place Left is, it's like, hey, yeah, I heard you guys are working with churches, and you're not expecting me to burn down my building and start a bunch of house churches. You know, you want to work with us? Yeah, we want to serve you. So when we find these types of churches, we feel like our role as catalysts is to, number one, pray like crazy for them, because that's a work of God. You know, what is it? One of the Blackabees said, find where God is working and get there. All right? Pray for them. We want to serve them. This is really important. The way we serve them is by training and coaching at their pace. Honor the bride. Go at the pace of the leadership. They're not ready to release baptism yet? Fine, I'm out of here. Most of them are not ready to release baptism yet. Okay? They're not ready to start churches yet? Be patient. Okay? Because I know about me, well, I was in pastoral ministry, and if somebody come to me with that stuff, I'd be like, no way, man. But as you obey Jesus, God begins to enlarge their heart and their vision. The third thing is we have to learn from them, because they're the ones that are actually leading the church. So learn from how they roll this out with their people. And then guess who becomes the best at casting vision and equipping other churches? These churches. And we can move on. All right? So when we find these, what we're discovering is that there's 3 areas that the churches are interested in. One of these 3, usually. One is they want disciple making. Come and to teach us how to make disciples. We're broken for the Great Commission. We're not doing it. Teach us how to make disciples. The second one is church planting. Hey, we really believe that God wants to plant churches. It's His plan A. There's no plan B. Help us start churches. The third is missions mobilization. They want to raise up and send their own missionaries by God's grace. They're realizing, hey, God's plan is complete through the church. The church can train up and send their own missionaries. So then, what'll typically happen, and so whichever one of these they're interested in, we come in and we serve them there. But here's the beauty. In Acts, disciple making leads to church planting. Acts 13 leads to missions mobilization. So in our training in 4 fields, we can cover all 3. It allows us to parachute in at whichever stage they're at. Okay? So, what I'm noticing is that when churches are going after disciple making, they're usually giving it a go, and they're probably using some type of non-reproducing evangelism tool, some disconnected discipleship that costs money. Don't mock that. Celebrate it. Hey, man, you guys are giving it a go. That's fantastic. Could we maybe try this out? Church planting, their strategy is shepherd-driven. Almost all church planting strategies are shepherd-driven, and they cost about $10,000 a year, if not more. It's expensive. Okay? Shepherd-driven is where you take a pastor and a few people around them, and you put them in a new area, and you're hoping that lost people will come to that. Instead of sending out the apes to bring the gospel, disciple the fruit, and you start a church by reaching lost people. Like what we see in Acts. Missions mobilization. They're usually subbing that out to an institution, and most of the training that missionaries are getting, they're going overseas. They have no idea how to make disciples. I'm not saying all, but I'm saying a good portion of them. They don't know how to make disciples. They were like Jacob. They want to go and start a seminary. Okay, so the guys that we're partnering with, that I won't name, off the record say 80% of the missionaries that they would get sent to them to work, they had to find something for them to do so they could work with the 20% that actually wanted to get to movement. What if we could send 100% that was ready to see movement and had the skills to do it? What if we could train them up here so they could be sent here and see movement happen? Wouldn't that be awesome? So I'll give you a couple examples. The church in Tulsa, Cedar Ridge, they brought us out and they said, hey, we have a vision to make disciples. We want to see 1,000 new disciples. I don't like that. So we came in and we started to train them. It was about this time last year. Our first touch of training, we had their elders, a few leaders, had about 50 people there. Got them out in the harvest. Come back for the second touch of training, we have 250 people there. 7 lead pastors from 7 local churches. And we had 10 obedient people that were training with us. So the Spirit of God is at work. The missions department says, hey, can you come and talk with us about, we have this vision to mobilize 50 units over to South Asia in the next 10 years. I'm like, you do? Yeah, we want to see if these two might be connected. So we cast vision from Acts, showing them, look, it's the church that trained up and mobilized. What you're doing here can help you accomplish this. You can send out the right kind of people. And so we got a partnership with the movement leaders over in India. We can send your people to them, but let us train them. Actually, let us train you to train them. And so that opened them up to the vision for church planting. Because what I'm noticing is if they obey them here, he opens up their vision here and eventually here. Just let them obey where they're at. Family Church in South Florida, they said, hey, we want to plant 100 churches. We've been trying a few different ways. We want you to come in and teach us what you're doing. Well, guess what? Let's back it up and teach you guys how to make disciples, because the way you make disciples will affect how you plant churches. And they were the ones that developed the 3 circles tool. So then they start training broadly. They use 3/3, boom, out of the commands of Christ. And their baptisms went from 80 a year to the last 3 years. They baptized over 800 people. And it's all their people doing it. There's no evangelism events. So now you got a culture of disciple making, which allows them to look and see who are the ones that God will raise up to plant churches. Because now they can plant churches by reaching lost people. So they've plugged 4 fields into their church planting strategy. And now they're sending out, they're called seed church planters, that no building, no budget, starting a church by reaching lost people. Isn't that awesome? And there's other churches out there. Like there's a church in Los Angeles, hey, we want to have a vision to mobilize 100 missionaries. Okay, well, let's help you mobilize missionaries that are going to get to movement. And we'll teach you guys how to train them. So, when we go in, we'll do the 3-touch training, and that helps form the team. But what's just developed within the last year now is, again, it becoming a ministry of the church. Hey, what if you guys took the training and we showed you how to train up your own church planters and your own missionaries? And you can mobilize them directly over to go after the UPGs and the UPGs with the teams that we have over in India and Nepal. So we've started these, we've got 4 of them right now. It's a church-based residence. If you don't know what that is, that's something churches are really into right now, to train up their own people. And all we're asking them to do, believe it or not, is every week you meet in a 3/3 group, and that's how you learn the content. Every week you go out in the harvest, and every week you meet to train some other people so we can see you train. And we want you to participate in a 3-touch process and a mid-level. In year 1, we're going to get you over to India so that you can see what's going on there, learn from it, train it, and then the guys in India can kind of evaluate them. Year 2, they're doing following the exact same thing, except this time they're helping lead the training. They're helping with the mid-level. They're raising their support if they're going overseas. So now do you realize that the church is able to have the training to equip their own people to plant churches locally and send them out to serve on a team here, and from there be sent to the nations? And then that church can eventually mobilize their own people to their own team leaders that are overseas. So that church becomes a mission agency. God's doing that. This is not theory. This is happening in the US of A. There are 44 residents in these 4 residencies right now, and there's 4 more that are ready to launch. Now, the residency is not the end all be all, but I'm just, we're just kind of, I won't say making it up as we're going along. We're just kind of learning from the Lord as we're just stepping through. One thing that also blows my mind is Southeastern Seminary is offering 36 credit hours to people that go through that residency. So now we've got a seminary that's saying, hey, we want people trained like this, so we can send them over.
Yeah, Southeastern's doing this same training, December 7th through 10th.
That's right. Yeah, we did one of these, a 3-day version of these. We didn't include the 4th field. But Carter was there, and a bunch of Southeastern 4 Fields guys went, and they led a 4 Fields training at Southeastern. And you can pray for George Robinson, because pray for that man, because he's the guy that's really leading the charge there. So, anyways, I know that's a lot to throw at you, and you probably got a lot of our own terminology, but I wanted you to be encouraged that, hey, God's doing this. He's taken this, and we're figuring out here how to equip and mobilize people here, and it's still Plan A. It's still the church.
Sleeping giant.
That's right. We're sitting in the pews. But we as catalysts have to own our side of the problem. Is that we've been throwing stones at the bride. We're frustrated because, hey, we don't have a place. Well, God opposes the proud, and He gives grace to the humble. That never stops. So we got to be humble. Now, I would say this. If you're an ape in a city, you go after moving yourself. All right? Don't let that stop you. But when you're working with churches, go at their pace. And I would say, if God can bless you with the opportunity to work with multiple churches, sometimes they get hot and sometimes they get cold. It allows you to, when they get cold, like, all right, I'll leave you here. I'm going to go over this one. It's warming up right now. All right, I'll leave you this one. Go over here and work. And now we're raising up leaders. The church in Tulsa that's leading their own residency, they got 12 people. The residency is being led by a business owner. He's not on staff. He's not getting paid to do this. He's working a full-time job and he's leading the residency. So because they were like, hey, we'll send him to Florida and let him learn there. We're like, no, you guys can do this. We believe that you can do this. And they are. And now others are coming on board. So, any clarifying questions?
Do I hear you saying that whenever a church says, hey, we want to do missions, that you're always bringing them back to disciple making and working through, or do you see them as individual on-ramps?
Yeah, well, the on-ramp here is we're gonna train them here and here so that they can mobilize this.
Okay.
See, what
Because
you're saying
we
is-
want to mobilize disciple-making church planners.
What you're saying is when you run into churches that are broken for lost and it's God's vision and they want training, it's normally training in one of these 3 areas.
That's
They're
right.
like, yeah, we want to mobilize missionaries, or we learn how to plant churches, and we want disciple making, and you use that desire to go back to disciple making.
Because that's where it starts, right?
Yep.
Because they all link together. Well, that's where you get your harvest, where you get your workers.
That's right.
Can you speak to the scenario where, church planning is not what they want to do, but they want to do disciple making, and then how that eventually results in folks in the harvest that need to be?
Yeah, like the Tulsa example. They started obeying Jesus for 3 months. They were making disciples out in the harvest. And once that mission vision rose up, then they connected the two. And they were not at all open to church planning. But then once they saw what kind of leaders they need to mobilize, they said, all right, we'll allow churches to be planted, but it was only those that were in the residency. So the residency allows room for these people to run in an honoring way, So it's like you got a position for apes that's actually like a good thing in the church. So it protects them from this, and it protects this from them. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So, I don't remember who asked it, but I don't totally understand how, I think some of the leadership in the church may still feel like people are leaving the church to start new churches. So how do you kind of
Yeah, that's a good question.
differentiate?
Well, if they're not there, then this is multiplying disciples.
Okay.
If the leadership says this is not churches, then it's not churches.
Okay.
So that's part of going at the pace.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Troy, when you say you're bringing the apes out of the church to gather, you're not saying we're taking them out of the church and starting a new church with apes. You're saying, hey, this is a new ministry of
That's right.
the church.
Okay.
They're still members at that church. It's just instead of serving in Awanas on Wednesday night, they're going out starting movements. I'm serious. That's not a knock on Awanas. I'm just saying it's a ministry of the church.
So they're still tithing, they're still
Yeah.
in their life group, they're still
Yep.
all that. This is just an added,
Yep.
this is just another added thing of dying to the calendar.
Now there are scenarios, and Mighty's going to tell us after church, after lunch. The ideal scenario is when this is working with the church and movement happens. There are a handful of scenarios where, for whatever reason, the church gets spooked and the leader pulls the reins back and says, "We're done." What I've observed in every case is that team is mobilized and they still get the movement. I'm an example of that. I got fired. And there's other people in this room that was the same story. Okay? Carter's been fired like 7 times. Alright? So, and I would tie my firing back to immaturity on my part. I didn't know any better. I don't blame them for firing me.
So can I ask so to keep the church from being spooked is that they start the residency, so when they do plant the church, it isn't like people are actually leaving, it's just an extended, it's an annex.
It's an extra branch.
Yeah. It's a church planting ministry of the church.
So it allows them to keep safe the feeling that nobody's really leaving the church. It still has
That's
an
right.
extension, and we still give up to the
That's right.
cause.
And they're still, the elders are still part, like in Cuba, the movement in Cuba, it's a bunch of groups multiplying under the umbrella of this church.
Yeah.
So there's case studies for that.
So, so essentially, the vernacular would be, these apes are having church, but for them the vernacular is home group or whatever.
Oh, you're
that's
saying
going
here?
at their
Yeah,
pace
we
and
call
respecting them.
We call them church planting team. We'll call it, Catalytic team. We call it a team.
Okay.
Now, we'll meet for.
Respectful vernacular is also honoring.
It's very important, yeah.
So
on the fourth field, you emphasize gathering and team, you don't emphasize church.
Yeah, we'll go as far as they'll let us go. If they'll let us, like in our case, it's church. And what Mike's a part of is a church.
yes, we're having church. We're having church.
It is true.
And there's one part of that church that was a member at a legacy church. And at First Baptist of Denson Beach. They loved so much what was going on. He's the pastor that we knocked on the door. They loved so much what was going on is they said, all right, at Catalytic team, they brought him up in front of the whole church. He used to be the youth pastor at Sugar Creek, Brad Kirby. He ordained them in front of the whole congregation. You are a church planter now. And they said to that small group, you guys are a church now. And they said, and this is the launch of our residency. We're going to raise up our own planters and our own missionaries. And the church commissioned them. And everyone's just like, what is happening? So I meet with the pastor casting this vision. He's like, how do I do this? I'm like, guess what? You've already got them. Just call that small group a church and a residency. And then that was their choice to commission and to ordain them. You know what kind of vision that casts for the kids in the middle school, in the high school?
Amen.
I'm part of a church that does that. I'm in. How many of you guys would have loved to be a part of that growing up?
Yeah.
The mission trips to India aren't just, trips that aren't doing this. Is that?
Okay, so when you go into the church and they said, hey, we want disciple making, well, what you're going to get is you're going to get STs and you're going to get apes. So you're,
Yeah, we need both.
Right, obviously you're going to get both. So let's say, I'm just going to give you a scenario. I walk into my church and I, talk to the pastor and he's like, okay, go for it, or whatever. So I go up to the church and say, hey, I'm going to have a little, whatever he lets me use, whatever vernacular I can use. So then I go and I start this little group. Well, I'm going to, let's say a month later, I'm getting a sense God saying, that's an ape and that's an ST. Okay, so now, but I'm going to make them all go out into harvest. But some of them, the apes, I'm like, you know, do you see what I'm asking is?
Yeah, when you guys go out together, and you can put this in here. When you go out together, the apes will drive it.
Right.
Like Ray. You can't be around Ray without going out in the harvest. So the shepherd teachers, you know, are like, okay, I'm going to go because I want to obey Jesus.
Right. Yeah,
All right?
exactly.
But then out in the harvest, these shepherd teachers are amazing at follow-up, where some of us can be like, all right, we're done, let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And they're like,
You know,
hey,
so
I'm
you've
gonna
got
say
the-
anything and talk to this person.
So you need both.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Any other questions on?
Really quick, the 3-touch training, the weekly rollout. Who's
Yeah.
leading the weekly rollout?
What do you mean?
So
Who's
you do the
who's facilitating a 3
Yeah, who's facilitating? That's something. The 3-touch.
Oh, the weekly rollout.
Yeah, the weekly.
The local leader.
Okay. So you giving him extra time in training, whoever that is, on the front end before the event, and how to lead.
Or we
that?
Skype. We do it over Skype. We do some discipleship.
This guy bullshit.
Now, if it's local, we do it.
Okay.
But
So
we
you can get there,
require this.
Right.
In fact, we build in the schedule of, okay, who's going to promote your weekly rollout? And we let them know ahead of time. You
So
need
if
to
it's
have
local
it.
to you, church comes on board doing this, then you would say, look, we're doing what we can roll out in the first bit. And then trying to raise up a leader who's 50-50 in the second one.
But really, we're handing it over like the second or third week. You got this, you got this, you got this, you got
Well,
this.
that too, in Cuba was the failure of this training because Catalyst went in and he had been leading this conference style training, 10-day trainings. And so what do all the church planners and pastors think gets the movement? Well, event trainings. And so in coming back around and looking at the stockages, it's because they haven't been doing weekly 3/3 or weekly church. It's like they come into a church, blow it up with a training, and be like, all right, deuces, see you in 3 months. Like, go, and then all these leaders are like, what do we do? You know? So they've had to go back and add in the weekly, because you're teaching them field 3, field 4 weekly. Field 1 and 2 is really the event, hardcore. Field 1, 2, field 3, 4 comes weekly. Yeah.
And we would say, like, event people, you've got to have weekly training.
Mm-hmm.
Weekly people are like, oh, we can only model this in the harvest. We don't need the events. It's like, well, if you believe there's more leaders out there than you'll do trainings.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
8 out of 9 of the L5 leaders in India were already existing Christians. How do they find them? Trainings. Every single training we've gone in from the outside, event training, we find leaders we did not know were there. And it forms a team. All right, so it's got, I believe, if in our context, do the both and. But just make sure you keep those linked together.
So as you're doing, so you get these people coming together and you're going through the events, and as the events form this team, is the team filtering apes? Or am I missing something?
We filtered the apes with the training to form the team.
Right, but the team is apes. Is it right? Is that right?
Yeah, you got some catalytic shepherds in there too. See, this is the filter.
Yes, I understand.
I think it's important to distinguish, like, we're not going in there and trying to look for apes and distinguish titles too soon, too early.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we gotta come in, that middle line is we're aiming for sharing and discipleship. And through that, the reality is shepherd teachers, they need to learn to share the gospel out of obedience, and apes, they need to learn to shepherd out of obedience.
Yeah.
So Christ likeness is our goal. It's not become a better ape. No, I need to grow into a fullness of Christ. And so I need to strengthen my shepherd skills and my teaching skills, even as an apostolic person. So I think I just want to be cautious that we don't come in and try to distinguish those things too early. Usually by field 4, when you start gathering, that's when those gifts start to be used a little bit better. Does that make sense? So getting started, everyone's on the same level. We share our faith, we make disciples, and as we start to see church happen, now let's start to distinguish what gifts has God given us to see multiplication and see sustaining for us.
But if you really want to, let the pioneers pioneer. Let the shepherds shepherd, and you do that together. But I can't reiterate here. I think we've learned from failure where we're imposing our will on churches. You need this. We're going to flip you into a missions organization. It's like, you can't do that.
This is a work of God. Like everything that Troy's talking about right here, and a lot of people who have lived this, it's like multiple lives across states and geographies. This is a work of God. and like the Spirit will guide you. Our inclination is to get down into the nuts and bolts and like help me with this, give me this step, this scenario. This is the work of God. And I'll say this for people in this room, for all of us who are hearing this, and to whom much is given, much is expected. Like this is a lot to be given, and there's a big responsibility on our shoulders. But Troy would have been able to live this, to see this happen, if he didn't constantly give the kingdom away to these churches and ministries, being constantly die to self, increase in humility, and give glory to God. And that's what you're really going to be doing. Like it's going to be hard to remember all these stories, what happened at this church in Tulsa, this and this and this and this, residency, yada yada yada. Remember this, like the people who've seen this happen and been able to do this with churches and ministries, they have constantly died to themselves, they've constantly given the kingdom away, and their suffering has gone up. Mm-hmm. That's what you're going to have to do.
And I would just make an appeal to you all. If you're not doing this yet, you want to learn, come train with us. We need trainers. Come with us. We'd love to have you come and train and help pioneer in these cities, because our vision for this next year is to train 100,000 in the U.S. and see 1 million gospel shares. So we need you. Ellis?
Is there any, do you wait till the event to do the weekly rollout? Is there any warning to starting the weekly rollout?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Get in the harbor.
That actually works really well, because we just did that in Miami. We did 5 weeks of weekly rollout. Dobbs did, and when we came in for the very first event training, we had a team that was excited.
Yeah.
They had already been on the harvest. They already were familiar with what to do to follow up with all these people, and so it almost was.
Because we're local, we can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're parachuting into a new city.
Yeah, it's hard.
But the great thing is, and that's you got modelers.
Yeah.
That you can go out with. So, all right. Well, take a couple minutes here and just what is this? Do you see this then? The steps of here's what God's doing to help us in this setting be able to equip and mobilize into this setting, so we can see movement happen. Take a few minutes. Say, all right, what does this look like for us? Where are we at? What would you add to your quiver as a trainer working with churches? Any tweaks you would need to make to what you're currently doing now?